Hi, how's it going? This is Resident Collinwood back with another Dark Shadows video for you guys and gals. It is episode 2 of Dark Shadows from the beginning. So, we get the opening monologue of Victoria Winters. She has arrived at Collinwood. She is in its doors by the end of the first episode. And that's where we pick up. She's now inside Collinwood. Elizabeth watches her as Victoria observes the large room and in general the large house. This isn't again. I've talked about Art Wallace or sorry, Cy Thomasoff's set designs in these episodes. The way they shoot this and the way the set design is, when you see Seaview Terrace and you see the backdrop of Seaview Terrace in this episode for the opening, and then you see the inside, it just feels like everything fits. Cy Thomasoff is showing you, yes, they're small sets in a sense, but they feel large, and that's the important thing because again, you're in a 40-room Gothic mansion. So again, another great job by Cy Thomasoff. Yes, this is narrated by Alexander Mulkey Isles, written by Art Wallace, directed by Lila Swift. So Vicky's in the foyer with Elizabeth. El- Vicky's impressed about the size of the house. Elizabeth, she also tells Elizabeth she's never been in a place this big, or let alone seen a place this big. Elizabeth asks for the note that she sent. So we get some confirmation, right? Again, Art Wallace does a really good job at answering, or at least confirming, a question we all had. Who really sent the letter to the Hammond Fallon home if we had any doubts in the first episode? We hear Elizabeth does in the first episode. It's confirmation. Elizabeth herself says she sent the letter. So not Roger, Elizabeth. And that's important to keep in mind because of what gets said in this episode. Now again, they're not going to say Roger sent the note, but there is some importance here. So Elizabeth asks for the note she sent. She looks at it. Victoria asks some questions about the house. For example, how many we have 40 rooms. She asks how many rooms are there. 40. We also hear that the east wing is closed down. That there are 40 rooms. The east wing is closed off. The east wing is shut off, closed off. We also hear that they only use part of the house. So they only use part of the west wing. What is the west wing? We'll say. We're Quentin State. Good. So again, they only use part of the house. They don't use a large part of it. So the east wing is closed off. What's in the east wing again? Oh yeah, the parallel time room. I'll get into that before I close off this video. Before I close out of this recording. So Elizabeth and Victoria have an opening conversation, and Elizabeth shows her to her room. We also we hear about Elizabeth's daughter. Oh, sorry, no, she doesn't show her to her room. They go into the drawing room. My apologies. When they go into the drawing room, Elizabeth says, we see Victoria go in first. She opens the window. That's where we see the entrance. We see the opening entrance of Dark Shadows. The waves hit the rocks, and then the entrance hits Dark Shadows. The music. When Elizabeth comes in, they have a conversation, and Elizabeth tells Victoria that she has a daughter her age. When we go to the Blue Whale, it's really interesting. We get a mention of Carolyn, who's about the same age as Victoria. Really, she's a bit younger than Carolyn is a bit younger. I want to say that fictionally, Victoria is 21 and Carolyn is probably about 19. She's under 21, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying she can't be in a bar. She absolutely can't. She just can't drink liquor. with that being said, we're introduced to two new characters. Really, we get a mention by Elizabeth, but really we get the two character introductions to Wilbur Strake and Burt Devlin. Burt Devlin actually asked Wilbur Strake, "Are you sure that's Elizabeth Collins' daughter? Or are you sure that's Carolyn's daughter?" All in the report, you know. And you also see Carolyn's date, Joe Haskell. Carolyn is dancing with another man. She's not dancing with Joe, he's too busy sitting down. Wilbur Strake informs us that Joe is mother's pick to marry Carolyn. So, I've talked about how in House of Dark Shadows, Elizabeth doesn't interfere in Carolyn's relationship. This is what I mean by Elizabeth interfering in Carolyn's relationship. That Elizabeth, I'm not saying she went out and personally handpicked Joe, but that is her necessarily picked to marry her daughter. If she has a say in anything, and she has a lot of say in her family business, and she has a lot of say in what goes on in the walls of Collinwood, she also wants a say in her daughter's relationship. Not necessarily strong arming, mind you, but if she can find any way for her daughter to marry Joe Haskell, she absolutely will. Despite despite what comes later. I'll explain. So you see Carolyn you see Carolyn dance with another man. Then instead of that man, she dances with another. You also have a very interesting situation of so another guy jumps in and starts dancing with Carol. Joe gets frustrated. He didn't really want Carolyn to dance with the first guy, let alone the second. So a fight ensues. And what happens? Joe Haskell socks the one guy in the stomach, taking care of him. The other guy jumps up, ready to fight. Joe puts him in a front face lock. That's a wrestling move. By the way, I love the fact that Dark Shadows used a front face lock here. It doesn't matter if it's to the ground. It's a front face lock. Google it. I actually might put the definition. So Burt Devlin gets up and pulls the other man out of away from Joe, getting in between the two men. He looks at the man who's straightening out his shirt and looking at Burt Devlin like, "I'll fight you too," and Burt gives him a look as to say, "Go ahead." Facial expressions are important in Dark Shadows. They were important in the first episode, and they're going to continue to be important. Demeanor is everything in DS, and it really is. Not just here, but in the future. It's another consistency of every writer that's ever going to be a part of Dark Shadows. This includes Art Wallace, and we have to give Art Wallace credit where credit's due, and his flowers, him and Dan, for many reasons. Number one, Art Wallace wrote a lot of these episodes, the beginning episodes, and I know people are going to say about Shadows on the Wall. I'll get into that before I end this video. Now, where I give Dan Curtis and company a lot of credit, I've given Cy Thomas off the sets. He does a great job in all these sets I see, and I see them multiple times, and I love them. I never get bored of these sets. They're so great looking. Now, do we always just get sets? Not in the beginning. And it's important to talk about this. Now, Burt Devlin tells Joe Haskell to take her home, and Carolyn, who are you to tell him what to do? And Burt tells her, "You go home, Miss Stoddard, or I'll paddle you. I'll take you across my knee and paddle you right here on the dance floor." I love the facial interactions of the crowd. They find this somewhat amusing and interesting. Like, "Oh, will he?" Yes, he will. So as Joe goes to leave, Burt tells him, "Joe, once you get Haskell, once you get her where she belongs, come back here. I want to talk to you. Now we don't get the rest of that conversation in this episode. We'll get that in the next one. It's important to note that after she takes after that she takes Joe takes Carolyn home. Vicky and Elizabeth are now upstairs. Elizabeth is showing Victoria her room. Here's the $1 billion question we've all asked: is Victoria Winters Elizabeth Collins' daughter? So, well, let me answer that question with another question of my own. Would you give a complete stranger the room that you used to sleep in as a child and a teenager up until the point you were married? I'd like to think not. I know I wouldn't. Elizabeth is giving her daughter, Victoria, her room. She didn't give Carolyn this room. She gave Victoria this room. And why not? She is her kid. No, they never actually confirmed this in DS, but this is as close as confirmation as we are ever going to get. And I love Dark Shadows for this. But it also drives you crazy as a fan. You want to know the real truth. Deep down, we all know the real truth. And I love them for this because it keeps you coming back as a fan. Not just Barnabas, these episodes. They'll keep you coming back because they're really interesting to watch and the way they're shot considering all the lovely set designs. Again, we see the long hallway, another set design. We see the inside of the room, another beautiful set design. So, do I think now some people might ask, well, did they ever use the Carey Mansion other than as a backdrop? Yes, they did. Now, there's going to be a very interesting scene. We hear a door slam, and Elizabeth thinks this is Roger. And I've always found this scene interesting because it's not. It's Carolyn coming back. She's been dropped off by Joe Haskell. What a quick ride, right? She must have told Joe to step on it, and I believe she did. It's a conversation we don't hear because we don't really need to hear that part. So Carolyn comes in. She takes off her coat. She doesn't hand it up in the foyer. She puts it in the drawing room. So it's almost sort of throwing it down. She walks over to the portrait of Jeremiah and says, "Big shot." We also hear from Elizabeth early on that Jeremiah built this house. Her great great grandfather. So we get told in this episode Jeremiah is her great grandfather. That's interesting. Great grandfather. That's interesting. Not Joshua, not Daniel, Jeremiah. So that again, it's interesting because we all know what happens with Jeremiah, right? And no, I don't think this is a plot error. I just think this is very interesting. History often tells us lies, and the Collins family is no different. Elizabeth even chooses to believe the lie until she has to accept reality of what truth is. Now, in this episode, when Elizabeth comes down, she sees her daughter. She says Roger because that's who she thought it was. Then she sees it's Carolyn, and well, she goes, "I can't believe you're back so fast." They have a conversation that Elizabeth can't believe Joe Haskell acted that way. Now, Carolyn defends Joe. So Elizabeth says she can't believe Joe acted that way. Carolyn defends Joe. Oh, it wasn't really his fault. It sort of was. Lovable Joe, right? Um, God. Also, in this episode, you have Elizabeth and Carolyn talking, Carolyn says, "This house is just fine for you, but not for me. But I can't just pack up and leave you in this nut house by yourself, all alone." And that's what Elizabeth tells her, "I won't be alone." Carolyn knew that Victoria Winters was coming because her mother told her at some point, and this conversation is proof of that. That's why we're getting this. I think that's a big reason we're getting this conversation. Because again, it's not just about Joe Haskell, it's about Victoria Winters as well. Also, there's something I didn't mention I'll get back to. But here, Carolyn says, please stop trying to marry me off to Joe. And, white knights have gone out of style. Again, she doesn't want to leave her mother alone. And again, Elizabeth telling her, "I won't be alone." Victoria Winters is, letting Carolyn know Vicky has showed up, and she showed up. All I can say for her is she must be out of her mind. So you have a very, very interesting thing here. Victoria Winters comes down the steps. She also, and she passes a portrait in the hallway, going through to the leading to the kitchen, and she goes, "Bip." So Victoria Winters is teasing the potential ghost of Collinwood. She's going to pay for that, not in a bad way. she, I've talked about we get actual scenes of the Carey Mansion. This is one of them. When she walks out, when the doors come open, the outside is not a backdrop. It's the actual Carey Mansion. This is an on location scene. It's not a set here. Her walking out those doors is not a set. Her walking down the steps is not a set. Also, we shoot the rocks on the waves aren't really sets, but still, that's a whole nother matter. Now, we do see a lovely set. We do see, is Widow's Hill real? To a degree, the hill isn't as deep as it looks. Now, there's a slight trickery of the camera. Anytime they turn the camera actually toward Widow's Hill, or you're facing Widow's Hill, you see the waves hit the rocks on a close up. Here, when Victoria Winters walks out of Collinwood, the great house, and goes to Widow's Hill, we don't see down. We're not looking down at the rocks. We don't see the rocks. We're actually looking up at Victoria Winters. And how this is done is, I've said it's not as deep as it looks. It's because it's not. There's a photo of Victoria Winters standing on a hill a bit, and right beneath them is Dan Curtis and company filming her. So they're looking up. They're making it look like she's higher than what she actually is, which is smart. There's somebody coming behind Victoria Winters. Don't worry, it's only Roger Collins. He asks her if she's going to jump. You wouldn't be the first. This is where we get a little bit of a tease about the widows. He doesn't mention it, but that's our tease. That's our sort of hint that people have died jumping off of Widow's Hill. It's called Widow's Hill for a reason, after all. The people have jumped off the hill, right? So, Victoria and Roger have a conversation. I've talked about the note, right? Elizabeth sent it. We get that confirmation here. Here's another thing we get. Victoria went. Roger says about, her being lonely. He didn't want her to get lonely up here. And she says to him, "Well, if I do, I'll have you to blame, you to thank or blame." And he goes, "Oh, really? Yeah, your sister said you were the one who recommended me for this job. Is that true?" Well, if Elizabeth says it's true, it is. Roger is even perplexed by this, and you could sort of tell by Lewis Edmund's face that, okay, what game is my sister playing here? It's a wonderful question that doesn't literally get asked verbally, but it gets asked through Roger's own mind. Liz is up to it lets Roger know Liz is hiding something, but especially about this girl. She's not just here to tutor David. Now, whether Roger actually connects those dots, he's at least suspicious of why his own sister would lie about him recommending the girl to this girl. Why can't she just say she heard the name? It would be logical, right? But no, Elizabeth doesn't say that to Victoria. There's a conversation earlier that Elizabeth and Victoria are having, and she says, "My brother was recommended to you." And when Vicky goes to ask, that's when you hear the door slam, and it allows Elizabeth to escape answering the question. We when we see Elizabeth and Victoria earlier in the drawing room, we hear footsteps. We hear Roger leaving the house, and Elizabeth holler for Roger. Really, Elizabeth wanted to say those same exact words probably, but in the drawing room. And that's a fun little thing too when you think about it. I'm not saying the writers messed up here, no, and I'm not saying it's the wrong scene, not at all. What I'm saying is she wanted to tell the lie in front of Roger so Roger knew about it. She didn't want Roger surprised. Now, Roger, who knows his sister pretty well, probably when hearing this from Victoria, is going in his mind, what is this woman up to now? And really, it's a fun little thing. He doesn't ask it out loud, but he asks it in his mind. So Victoria asked Roger what those lights are out at sea. He said, "Oh, it's a freighter going to Paris." And Victoria says, "You know, that ship's going thousands of miles, and I almost couldn't get here from the train station. But a nice man offered me a ride. He says he knew you, and he says, oh, he did? His name is Devlin." Roger's in shock. He looks afraid. He looks like he just heard the name of a ghost or a dead man. He grabs Victoria. "Devlin, Bert Devlin." He's shaking her. "Yes, Mr. Collins." She's shocked by this. Roger is afraid and he's showing fear. Roger also now knows that the man he, a man, I give a little bit of a tease here, but you're going to find out this in later episodes. We don't find it out here. A man Roger helped sent to prison is back home after 5 short years. And Roger's got the shock of his life. Roger leaves, leaving Victoria. Victoria Winters goes back to Collinwood. She hears a piano being played. She goes into the drawing room and sees Elizabeth playing a tune. Elizabeth stops playing, face down, and looks like she might be crying, or at least upset. Victoria goes up to her room, and we get the end credits. Now, there's some things I didn't talk about here that I want to mention here. Really, we get in this episode. Keep in mind, yes, this is episode 2 of Dark Shadows, but it's the same night. It's the same night Victoria Winters arrives. So, in a lot of ways, we're getting our first sense of time. It's the same. In one night, Victoria and Burke Victoria Winters arrives. Burke Devlin returns. Mr. Wells knows about it. Maggie Evans most likely knows about it. And people in the Blue Well know about it. That's the first episode. The second episode, even more people in the Blue Well know that some man broke up a fight between Joe Haskell and another guy, and told Carolyn to go home and told Joe to take her home. We also know that the same man that Carolyn didn't know who he was, Roger Collins, hears a name that's long familiar to him in Bert Devlin. That man who broke up the fight was Bert Devlin, as we all know. Again, it's a little thing here because, okay, this is our first real sense of time in Collinsport or Collinwood. These events, these first 2 episodes, all happened on the same night. And as little as that might be, it's actually pretty significant because we're going to get a sense of loss of time in Dark Shadows. So, this here, keep it in mind, yes, 2 episodes in, we're still on the same night. It's also Carolyn knows Victoria has actually arrived. The help has arrived. I'm trying. Oh, the East Wing. Yes. Before I go, did Elizabeth really close off the entire East Wing, a good portion of the East Wing, because of money issues? That's what's going to be said pretty much in later episodes. But do I buy it? Look, I know they didn't plan for a parallel time room right here and right now in this current being of where Dark Shadows is at this moment in its history. To put it in context, yes, I'm talking about Dark Shadows in 2023. Okay? But when this aired, this was 1966. They had not thought of a parallel time room yet. They had not thought of Barnabas Collins yet. Hell, they haven't even thought about the Phoenix arc yet. Those whole things are all to come. Now, did they always know they were going to put a ghost in? I'm going to say yes because in the first episode, there's hints that this house is somewhat haunted. We also get Victoria going up to a portrait and going boo. It lets me know one other thing. Victoria Winters is thinking about what Maggie still said to her, and I love that fact. It's small, but it's important because of things we're going to get later on in other episodes. So again, in context, there's no actual parallel time room yet. Now, could it have always been there? Sure. As a fan, I'd like to think that the parallel time is the reason that they closed the actual East Wing. Now, does that mean Elizabeth knows about it? Maybe she just honestly did close it off because of money. But maybe she also closed it off because she heard strange sounds. Again, there's going to be later episodes you could sort of come back to this and point to sort of weird situations going on. And I'll get into those episodes as I go along. Um, I don't want to, again, I don't want to spoil everything in just one episode because there's a lot to get to with each episode. Also, too, keep in mind, we still don't know where Bert Devlin's been all this time. Again, they don't answer that in this episode, and I'm glad Art Wallace doesn't. It's a beautiful little footnote. Think about it. We've had 2 episodes with Vicky and Burke. And even though Burke Devlin is a Collinsport native, we know Vicky's motives for being in Collinwood. We know that she's looking, yes, she is here to work with David, tutor David, be David's friend, but she also has an ulterior motive. She's also here to find out about her past. With Burke Devlin yet, we don't know why he's here. Yeah, he's from Collinsport, but that's not the only reason. And no, I'm not going to spoil that reason here. Now, DS fans, you all know the reason. But I'm having some fun with these episodes. Trying to think if there's anything I missed. I don't believe so. Okay. Ladies, gentlemen, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys probably later tonight for episode 3. Bye bye.